little bit about me, and then we'll move on to the to actually what we have on the agenda for today. So I started out. I've been in the field for now about 12 years. So started out in 2005. Variety of roles. I worked in the family business, went abroad, was in the US for about 5 years, been outside the family business for about 7 years. So graduated from Harvard Business, worked with McKinsey, came back, joined Myntra, and then back into the family business. So I've done sort of a range of roles in my career, from more entrepreneurial ventures to being a consultant to Fortune 500 companies to working with small, mid-sized organizations, both in India and abroad. My forte is anything to do with retail and consumer. It's also where my interests lie, and I'm currently from Bangalore. Right, so today we're going to look at three things. The first is, how do you identify the various elements of your support system? The whole topic is, how do you build a support system to aid your comeback? So first, let's look at what are the elements of it. Then let's look at how do you actively build these elements at work, right? So your formal support system. And finally, taking a holistic approach to your work and life. So we started with the first one. There's a saying that says, no man is an island. So I think it's equally applicable to both genders. So I like to say no woman is an island as well. And support at work or otherwise. And specifically at work, there are three types of, which is something we haven't been hearing too much about in the workplace yet, but it's quite, it's gaining a bit of momentum in the US and in other economies. And you need supporters. So we'll go a little deeper into what each of these are. So when we talk about mentor, a lot of people here are already aware of the term, they know what it means. But a mentor is actually a person who builds a personal relationship with you. So it's someone with whom you have a connect. They are somebody who roots for you, they'll advise you, they help you navigate the corporate ladder. And what I mean by that is they'll kind of give you tips and tricks. They sort of tell you the rules of the game, as it were. Right? A lot of times they end up being a role model, somebody that you look up to. And typically they don't expect much in return. So that's the role of a mentor in your life. And they usually come in many forms. So here are 4 examples that I picked because you typically tend to find the coach. He guides you, she motivates you. She sort of gives you a lot of feedback. A connector is somebody, on the other hand, who pretty much opens up their phone book and says, okay, let's see where you are. This is what you expect. I know just the right person to put you in touch with. And then they kind of connect you to the right people. A challenge, a lot of times we have these kinds of mentors in our life where we go to them and we say, well, I'm thinking about this and, starting this other thing, or I want your advice. You push your thinking a little bit to say, okay, but have you thought about this? Thought about it? This you to think bigger, right? Or the other way around, to say, look, this is quite vague. I want you to make it much more tactical and practical. The cheerleader, who's somebody that you have a strong connect with. They kind of cheer you, lift you up, keep you going. Especially in hard times, you kind of find them as a good source of strength. How do you find a mentor? There are formal mentorship programs, at least the large organizations, they do have these programs. So, Ford has it, Unilever has it, they've had an active one for a few years now. IBM, I think, has it as well. A lot of the big organizations do. Small, mid-sized companies still don't have a lot of formal mentorship programs, but there are informal ways in which you can find a mentor. And it's literally about seeking out senior leaders, role models, people in positions of influence and authority within the organization, and seeking out someone with whom you're able to make a connect. So this is critical because you've got to find someone who matches your style as well. Otherwise, because the whole point of a mentor is someone who has a personal relationship with you. So you've got to be able to connect with them. How does it differ from sponsors? Right now, a sponsor is someone who's invested in your career. This is somebody who uses their political capital to advocate for you. So they are actively pounding the table for you. The biggest difference is this. Now, they not only advise you, but they act. Right? They act on your behalf. So they're the kind of people who ensure that you've got the right roles, right? They look into your career. Is she in the right position? Is she doing a bit of a trick question because you don't really choose a sponsor. They need to choose you. But there are things in your control that you could do to ensure that you find a good sponsor, right? One of them is just focusing on performance. This is far and away probably the biggest thing that you could do. You've got to be a strong performer. Only then will you find someone in a senior position who's willing to take you on as a protege. The second thing is, this is more of an attitude. You've got to make your boss look good, right? So it's not just about you, but if you are looking for someone who's going to be invested in your career, then this is a two-way street. So you don't just go to them saying, hey, help me, hey, do this for me, hey, do that for me, but you've got to give back, right? You've got to make them look good. You've both through your performance as well as, giving some time, some mind space, right? Helping them out in anything that you know that that they are looking for help or that they are working on, and it's an area that you can provide some kind of help in. And I can get into this in a little more detail in the Q&A if you need to. The other thing is, typically look for someone who's 2 levels up. Try and nurture multiple potential sponsors. The other thing, another way in which you've got to find, in which you can find sponsors, is you've got to become a known entity, which means people have to know about you and they've got to see you in actions. And the way you can do this is you volunteer for any visible, become active in industry, you attend conferences, but you basically put yourself out there. And finally, you've got to take feedback well, because a lot of time, like I said, for you to advance in your career, you need to know what you're doing well, what you're not doing well. And some of this is objective, and sometimes, and many times this feedback is subjective. It's basically someone saying, hey, look, this is the DNA of our organization. This is our work culture, our code of ethics, and this is what we expect you to follow. And you've got to take that well. So it goes back to having that good attitude, right? Of understanding that if someone needs to invest in me, then I need to be able to take their feedback and act upon it. So the third and the final part in your support network is actually supporters, right? And this is not your formal network. This is what I call your informal network. And this exists both inside as well as beyond the workplace. These are typically friends, family, the kind of women's networks that are there for you, any shared interest groups. They have a undue influence in your career decisions. A lot of people who choose to lean into work or who are forced to lean back from demanding sort of work schedules, they do this because of a strong support network or the lack of one, right? And the informal support network, which is your friends and family, they play a very, very big influence in this. They should be a source of energy, right? I know that's not always the case for a lot of people with family, but that's what I mean by supporters, right? You've got to see, is this person a source of energy? If they are, then they are a supporter. If they're not, then you've got to go out there and build your supporters. Typically, these people provide a listening ear, they're a sounding board. They give you a sense of belonging because you're able to have some form of camaraderie with them. They kind of keep you buoyant and positive. And they are very critical to achieving work-life balance. So we've talked about the 3 different elements. Now, how do you develop your formal support network? Now, I'm going to talk about networking here, and this is by no way exhaustive or comprehensive. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I would request all of you to please read up on it, about how to network efficiently, how to network successfully, because there's a lot of little tips and tricks and ways in which you can. So I call it the N word because a lot of people don't like it. The reality is 80% of jobs are never advertised, but they are filled via networking and via referrals. This is from studies that have been done in more developed nations. I would suspect that in India, that number is far, far greater than 80%. Networking is critical to career advancement, but what we find is many women feel very awkward about doing it. And that's because it really requires a shift in mindset. And what I mean is this. So you've got to go from thinking this, right? And raise your hands if any of you feel this, right? Because I've heard this echoed in a lot of forums that I've gone through, where a lot of people, the moment you say networking or, you need to network or why you don't network, this is typically what we hear. Well, I just work hard, so, I expect to be successful. Or, these high profile people, they're so busy, I don't want to bother them. I don't want to seem arrogant by talking about myself. It's just about FaceTime anyway. I've made an appearance, right? So what more is there to do? I just don't want to do it because it feels fake and I feel like a phony. So we've got to shift from having this kind of a mindset to the other side, which is, if I look at each of these statements, if I just work hard, I'll be successful. My advice to you would be, look, don't confuse what's ideal with what the ground reality is. The truth is that that's not enough, and it may not be ideal, but we've got to really do a bit more. As for people are so busy, I don't want to bother them. You've got to be proactive in your own career because no one else. And there are ways in which you can network successfully, and the devil is in the details, right? You can read up on it and find out techniques in which you don't bother people, but you actually network successfully and in a manner where you form close personal relationships with people. I want to avoid talking about myself. I don't want to seem arrogant. Look, the reality is if you don't make yourself visible, people are not going to know who you are or the good work that you do. And that is key to advancing in your career. Networking events are not about FaceTime or just putting in an appearance. It really is an opportunity to make an impression. So if you walk away from a networking event and you've met 3 or 4 people, have they left with a lasting impression of you? And the final thing about it feels fake, you don't need to change your entire demeanor. You don't need to put on a persona. You've got to go and be your authentic self. But there are ways in which you can be prepared to ensure that you gain the most from your networking experience. So that comes to, I think, the final slide in this, which is when you think about building your support system, and we've talked about multiple elements of it. We've spoken about the formal elements, which is mentors, sponsors, and boss. And really, those formal elements depend on the work culture. How many mentors you have, what kinds of sponsors you have, the ease with which you're able to find these folks. It really depends on the DNA of your organization. But we also have the informal support elements, which is friends, families, these kinds of forums, which are either women-oriented or sort of on the basis of special interest. All of these things holistically go towards creating the kind of support structure you need to ensure that you're able to advance and sustain your career goals. So I'm going to leave you with 2 parting thoughts. One is work-life balance is not about having it all. Right? There's this illusion that when you say work-life balance, you think, well, I have a fulfilling career and I have a meaningful life and it's perfect, right? It's not. It's really about making trade-offs that you're okay with. So many times you've got to decide, all right, this is a time when work takes precedence, so I'm okay with missing out on my child's dance recital or not being there for this particular event in my family because I would choose to prioritize work more at this point in time. Or the other way around, where you say, look, I'm going to take a break because this is the time when I want to focus my energies on my personal life and I want to invest in my family, but I'm going to come back later when I'm ready for it. So these are really about the trade-offs that you make that are in line with your goals and that you're comfortable with. The final thing, and I'll put this in here because I think as women, we tend to not do too much of this. As women, I think a lot of us tend to juggle a lot of balls in the air. And the first one to drop is always anything to do with our personal goals, right? So this is not work and this is not family, but this is stuff like eating right, getting good sleep, exercising, taking the time to be more mindful. That's the first thing, and I'm guilty of this as well. I think a lot of people who are stretched for time, you think, okay, like I just don't have enough hours in the day, so I'm going to spend them on work and I'm going to spend them on family, and I really don't have any time to spend for myself. And that's fine in the short run, and there'll be a lot of opportunities and a lot of occasions in your life where you will find yourself really stretched for time. But in the long run, you do need to invest in self. And that brings me to the second and the last point that I've got to make on that, which is manage your energy, not your time. And what I mean by that is a lot of people say there's just not enough hours in the day. Yes, that's true. There are a finite number of hours in the day, but spend them on the right things. Seek people and activities that energize you. Minimize anything that depletes energy. So if there's something you're getting sucked into work, that's just not a source of energy for you. It just drains you. It makes you feel really exhausted, mentally drained, fatigued. See if there's a way you can get out of it, or see if there's a way where you can change that. Similarly, with all of the stuff that you do outside of work, if something is just draining you, see if there's a way you can outsource it, give it to somebody else. Really think very deeply about why you're choosing to spend your time and your energies on that activity, and see if you can change that. Like I said, you've got a finite reserve of mental, physical, emotional energy. And the key to having a long and fulfilling and a successful, balanced career is really to allocate all of your resources, which is both your time as well as your energy, in line with stuff that are your priorities. So those are my 2 sort of parting thoughts. And and which I hope that I can leave you with before we kind of open this up to questions and answers. The final thing that I do want to talk about for the audience here. Now we're having a roadshow this Saturday, and that's happening simultaneously in 6 cities, and you can see that there. I'm going to be participating in the one which is being held in Bangalore. That's this Saturday in the morning, and and Gayatri can talk a little bit more about the roadshow, but it basically is an opportunity for you all to meet with many different types of mentors. So in one opportunity, you get a chance to have almost like a speed dating, but you have like a speed mentoring session where you connect with someone for about 20-30 minutes at a time before you move on to somebody else. And so you get an opportunity to meet with multiple different peoples and answer the kind of questions, the burning questions that you've had in mind, make some kind of a connect, and basically feel like you've got a strong sort of support system for you. So just a little shout out that it's this Saturday happening in sort of in a face-to-face physical sort of location. And if you all are in any of these cities, do seek out the one closest to you and find a way to get in touch with us. All right, Gayatri, that brings me to the end of it, and I'd like to roll it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Lavanya. It was a beautiful session. And so, ladies, we are open up for the Q&A session. We have a question from Kosha asking, can you please give me the names of formal mentorship program?
All right, so Kosha, this really depends organization to organization. Like I said, Unilever has a few. I think IBM and Adobe have that as well. Ford has it. Typically, a lot of the large organizations have them, right? And that's why the HR does a very good job of letting you know that, look, we have a mentorship program. Myntra, for example, had one. It was just starting out when I was leaving, when I was leaving the org. So typically, they have a formal program, and they say where they actively look for women to. And it's usually part of the diversity and inclusiveness efforts, and they actively look for women to opt in, and then they will try and find mentors for you, both who are women as well as men across different levels.
Okay. So how to get in touch with them?
I'm not sure what organization you're part of, but I would recommend that you speak to the HR in your org and ask if they have a formal mentorship program. If they don't, whether they could, think about starting that. And that's actually the best way.
Okay. So any questions? So Lavanya, most women just pick up a job when they get back to their career after a career break. But initial stages, they find it difficult to get adjusted, or things would be a turbulence back home, because they're getting back to work after a long time. So how can this be handled?
Okay, so that actually goes back to, I think, what I was saying about you've got to take a holistic approach to your support networks. The biggest, I think, a lot of reasons why people lean back, and this is what I've understood, and this is me speaking as well as a recent mom. I've got a 9-month-old baby at home. A lot of times in our society, family work or sort of family priorities are considered women priorities, right? So they kind of expect women to take on a disproportionate share of raising the family and of parenting. Now, as long as that exists, it's going to be very hard for you to find the kind of support that you need at work, because you're always being stretched in multiple directions. The first thing that you need to do is set your house in order, right? If you have, if you're lucky to have your parents living in the same city as you, or your in-laws living in the same city as you, use their help, right? Whether it comes to babysitting, whatever it is. But don't fight with your in-laws and don't fight with your parents. See to the extent possible that you're really able to make them become allies for you. In terms of work, I think a lot of times people sometimes they just forget, right? They forget it, and I joke about this, but it's true. Oftentimes, more times than I can count. People at work expect you to work like you have no family, right? And your family members expect you to be a parent as if you have no work. And the reality is that you are stretched in multiple directions. Make sure your boss is aware of your priorities. Make sure that you don't say no all the time, but when you say yes in a mindful manner, where if somebody asks you to do something, you're like, hey, look, that's great. I'm going to pick this up, but I do need to leave because I've got this very critical thing for my child, or this other priority that I can't get out of. But I'm going to work on it and maybe get back to you by tomorrow. Should that be okay? So these are little tips and tricks that you can use to ensure that people at work know that you always come in with a positive attitude. You're always saying yes, but at the same time, you're making them aware that you've got other priorities as well. And similarly, at home, you've got to find the right support system. So for example, I don't have family in Bangalore. So I'm not able to really rely on my parents or my in-laws to come down on short notice. I have invested in having some kind of a support system with nannies, daycares, and all of that. It's sort of cobbled together. It's not perfect, but you've got to do what you can.
The next question is from Seshu, who says, how much is reskilling important for a comeback?
It's kind of a broad question. I think, Gayatri, if I'd like the person to elaborate a little bit more on this so that I can really understand what they're trying to get at and answer it.
Yes.
It really depends on your role. It depends on your industry and a lot of different things.
Okay. So, Seshi, if you could just elaborate on that question and then we can get that answer for you. There's a question from Diksha asking, can sponsors be influenced by our mentors in a negative direction? How do we exactly identify our mentors?
If someone is influencing a sponsor or a mentor in a negative direction, they are not your sponsor and they are not your mentor, right? What you're talking about is just other typical elements at work, right? Every organization will have some elements of politics, will have, some aspects of it that we don't really like. They're not your mentors, they are not your sponsors. It Mentors are, if you go back to the definition, mentors are someone who you have a personal relationship with. They want you to do well. They don't expect much of you, but they're sort of rooting for you, right? And sponsors are people who take you on as their protege. They are the people who actually make things happen for you at work. So they're the guys who have the political clout. And even if they are not your immediate boss, they will ensure that your immediate boss understands that, look, you're a rising star in the organization and you need to be given these kinds of opportunities. So, what do you do about people who spread sort of negative stories about you? Well, I would say the first thing is reflect and see, is there truth to those stories? Is this feedback that someone's trying to give you and that you have not been taking them well? Because sometimes that is the case. That we tend to get fairly defensive and like there's no way that we can rise in the organization unless we work on incorporating feedbacks and on moving up. Now, if you found out that it's not the case, it's just someone who you think, in your opinion, is just sort of spreading some negative stories about you, then you've really got to let your performance speak for itself. You can't really win them all. You can't um, please everybody, but I think you've got to seek out your sponsors, your mentors, the kind of people that you gel with, which is why I said it's very, very critical you find someone you make a connect with, because your personal style might be very different from somebody else, and that's totally fine. As long as you have your support group, you can't really control all of these other factors, and it'll become less and less relevant.
Another question from Sonali, who says, like you said about mentorship programs, but it is very difficult to get through to get even an interview call. It's like no entertains. How do we approach in this case?
Okay, I think this you may not be talking about mentorship programs. So mentorship programs are actually quite different, right? You can't interview for them. My understanding, and they may be a little bit different in different organizations, but my understanding is that they really are programs that are formal programs that are made available to most people in the workplace, right? They are disproportionately more helpful to women because I think women have other demands on their time, and then they tend to kind of like drop out of the workplace more, especially when their family life sort of becomes a little more demanding at different points in their career. And so these are programs that are created for them. You don't really interview for them, so I'm not sure what this is. What this is for. Perhaps this person is talking about just interviewing for a job.
So, Nali, if you could just elaborate more on that or be clear on your question, then we'll get that answered for you. And the next one is from Muskan asking, could you please name companies prefer hiring women after a half-year break? Please specific, please be specific if there are any specific programs or departments more welcoming in those companies.
Okay, so it depends. So there's a couple of things. One is industry and the other is company, right? There are certain industries and certain roles which are more welcoming to this. I do know that within the creative industry, it's easier for people who have been in a marketing line to come back to it, right? It's easier for people who, but I'm not that I'm aware of. I'm not too sure about within the software industry what it's like, or within banking what it's like. In terms of companies, there are some companies which are more conducive to this. An example would be Unilever. McKinsey is another one. Myntra also has been working on this. I think the within the Tata Group, and I'm not sure which organization exactly, but within the Tata Group, I know that there's been a huge push for them to sort of get people who've had a break to come back, and to sort of restart their career. I forget what it's called, but I think it used to be called SKIP, SKIP, and it stood for something. But I think you can, if you do a little bit of search, right, you will be able to find organizations which actually have these kinds of programs. But these are the ones that come to mind: Tata, Myntra, McKinsey, Unilever. These are the ones that I know firsthand that do have such programs in place, and they do actively, if not actively look for, at least they have a positive view towards women who are re-entering the workforce.
Great. So there is a question from Nikhila and Kavita Singh, whose questions are
Yes,
quite.
she's mentioned it, SCRP.
Yes. So, how do you find mentors who could guide you on getting back to work when you're currently on a break? Also, how do you find mentors to help you with your startup ideas?
So if you go back to what I've said, right, with how do you find mentors? It's a lot of it is about you've just got to network, right? Now, a mentor and a sponsor are both in your formal network. Now, networking events, a lot of them happen at work, but there are a lot that can come up through forums like these, right? So, Jobs for Her is having the R3 Roadshow, which is nothing but a mentorship, but an opportunity for you to find these kinds of mentors. They may not be in your own field or in your particular organization, but that's why they're mentors, right? They're not really sponsors. When it comes to sponsors, you've got to really go out there and be proactive. There are no organizations that I am aware of, I may be mistaken, but there are none that I'm aware of in India that have formal sponsorship programs. And typically it doesn't work because you've got to find that connect and you've got to make a sponsor choose you. And the only way to do that is, you basically make yourself very amenable to him. I'm going to give you a tactical example, right? So when I was at Myntra and I was a VP in the revenue team, and my CTO, who was at the time both the chief technical officer as well as the chief product officer, so he was working on some very, very cool sort of some very cool cutting edge features for the app and basically in the direction that Myntra wanted to go to at the time. And I knew that, and I knew that he was doing this, but I'm sitting in the revenue team, right? I have nothing to do with product. I have nothing to do with tech. I've got a few product managers and tech folks reporting into me, but I'm not really of that organization. And so he's not anybody with whom I have any kind of a direct line. But I pinged him, reached out to him. I basically said, look, I know that you're working on this project. I've taken some time out and I've tried to understand a little bit about this. And here are my thoughts, right? Here are some ideas and things that I think we could do. And I basically put together a PowerPoint, but it was just like 2 or 3 slides. But I looked at it and I said, here are best in class examples. Here's what we can learn from them. In addition to it, here's what we can do, which is in line with our organization and our objectives. And I sent it to him on a Saturday morning when I knew that he's not going to be inundated with 10 million emails. So he's going to have a little more relaxed time to be able to look at it. And within half an hour, I got a response from him saying, hey, this looks great. Yeah, sure, we could meet up for 30 minutes. I would love to. Let's do that, over lunch on Tuesday. So that's the easiest way, right? Like you can't go in there telling someone mentor me, sponsor me, right? You need to give them something of value and become visible and let people know that you have things to add. And that's the way in which you cultivate these kinds of mentors and sponsors, and you get someone to take you under their wing.
So question from Meghna asking, does reskilling done through sites like Udemy really worth mentioning in your CV, like web technology specific topics?
Yes, it does, with the caveat that there are good programs and bad programs. I would say try and find something credible, right? So there are a lot of Udemy courses, but I think some of them, many of them are free. I don't know if all of them have certifications. Coursera has a lot of specializations. They do have certifications at the end of it, and you only get the certification if you have gone through some form of peer-reviewed, I think, testing or having completed assignments. So there are different degrees, right? I would say focus on quality over quantity, as opposed to saying I've done these 10 courses. Maybe pick one or two that are quite well known or that have come from a credible institute, and try and put them on your resume. It certainly shows a lot of initiative. So, as someone who's looking at resumes and looking for people who are actively seeking opportunities, if I see this person is a self-starter, right? She started out, say, in the creative field in Ogilvy and Matheson or GWT, right? All of her work has been focused on offline, has been focused on ATL and BTL. She's had no exposure to digital marketing, but she has taken a specialization course at Coursera. She's actually completed it. She's done quite well. She's built up a portfolio. She's done independent projects or freelance projects. She's kind of tried to do something on her own. What it does is it shows me a lot of initiative that this person has. And those are the kinds of things that are very rare. Most people don't do that. So if you do that, I think you put yourself in a very good position with people in HR or in any position of authority where they have an opportunity to give.
Do we have any more questions, ladies? So Lavanya, when you say that we have to get connected to these mentors personally, is it only during
Mhm.
the event, or can we get in touch with them through an email or a phone call or WhatsApp? Is that okay?
Absolutely, through any. I would, so it depends person to person. So, for example, I hate using WhatsApp for work, right? Because it just becomes so much load, because everybody expects you to sort of respond right that minute. It's not the best use of that medium. But I really like keeping things streamlined, and I don't mind at all if people reach out to me by LinkedIn or they send me an email. So that's my personal preference. You might find, people have different ways in which they communicate. The example that I gave you of how I reached out to my CTO and CPO was an example of someone whom I reached out to in a way that did not come from a networking event. Oftentimes, you're in organizations that create those kinds of avenues, and a networking event doesn't have to be a formal networking event, but many times it's just a get together. It's a town hall, it's some avenue where a lot of people come together, and you can use that opportunity to network, to meet with them, to sort of, make yourself known, right, within the circles, and create an impression upon people that you would want, you want them to have you on their radar. But even if those kinds of avenues don't exist, there's nothing that holds you back from saying, look, I know this person in this organization is working on these kinds of projects. Now that I know them and I want to make an inroad into that, or I want to broaden my skill set a little bit, let me reach out to them, and let me reach out to them with something useful and with something that is of value to them. I think that's critical. Far too many times I get emails from people saying, hi, I need your advice, I want this, right? Now you've got to think about the typical senior executive who's got, as it is, she's probably getting, 5 emails every minute, if not, like every half an hour at least, right? And on top of it, she's busy, she's in meetings, she's in workshops, she's doing a lot of things like this. And her inbox is constantly pinging. Now imagine if on top of it, you go send her an email saying, hi, I need your help. I want advice. How can I do this? And especially if the question you're asking is literally something that you can just Google and find out for yourself in half an hour. So those are the kinds of emails that tend to be ignored, that tend not to be responded to, because I think we've got to help ourselves. We've got to do our homework. We've got to come in prepared, right? And we've got to not just ask, but we've got to show to our potential mentors and our potential sponsors that, hey, look, I am someone who can add value to you. And this is what I come in with, and this is the homework that I've done, and this is why I would like to be your protege.
So, question from Muskan asking, could you please share if any specific course is required for an software sales or professional to re-enter the IT industry, or 1 or 2 year after 1 or 2 years of break?
Okay, so I'll be honest. My background is in retail and consumer. This is not really something that I would have very practical sort of feedback on. But what I would encourage is, you've got 43 people right now. So if any of you have responses to Muskan that's going to help her, then please do share that. Y'all are probably, uh, you know, have more insights into this than anything I could offer.
So another question, Lavanya. See, most of the women after a career break wants to have a career shift. It's because of their own personal problems, the timing, and they want to be a freelancer and all that stuff. But when they take up this, they finish the course and they take up this career shift, decision, and they get a job, and they realize in a few days or a few months that this is not my field. How do they deal with it?
It's I think it really is a personal journey for everyone. And so when you say when they realize it's not for it, you mean getting back into the workforce or just that particular line?
That particular life. Like, is it
Okay.
okay to let go of it, or should they start, try to get adjusted, or what is your take on it?
So that really is a personal call, but there's some feedback that I can offer, right? Now, as someone you've got to understand how your resume looks to people. If you've got too many jumps in your career, right? You've tried something for 2 months and you moved on somewhere else for 3 months and you've tried something else for another few months. You've got a break and then again you tried something for a couple of months, right? Or 6 months. You have a lot of short stints and you have a lot of breaks in your career. It does not look good. What it can signal is this person is not really serious, or she doesn't know what she wants, and she just keeps running headlong into projects before reflecting on it and thinking about whether she's going to be able to do justice to it. So that is the impression that you would give out, right? So when we tend to see that with a lot of people who have too many short stints in their CV, and there's not necessarily anyone who's taken a break, but even just folks who've had too many short breaks, in a very, very short period, too many jumps in a very short period of time. It's okay for you to get into something and realize, hey, I've made a mistake. I thought that this would be a, a line that I would be happy with, but I see that I'm not really enjoying it as much, or I'm not really finding it meaningful. The way to maneuver out of this is very slowly and with a lot of focus and a lot of, say, reflection. So, what aspects of it is it that you don't enjoy? Is it that particular work itself, that particular industry? Like, you just hate everything about marketing, right? Because the industry, especially digital, it changes too much. You got to constantly keep yourself updated. You really don't, have the time or the energy to do that. Then maybe find some other line, right, where it doesn't change that often. Or is it that particular organization? You really don't dislike that place and the DNA of that place. In which case, try to find another organization which is more of a cultural fit. Try to speak with people who've been in that organization. Either they've moved out from there or they are currently in there, and ask them and see what their experience has been like. Or if that's, or if it's not the organization, it's not the industry, it's just that you're finding it very hard to deal with all of the different conflicting demands. Take a step back, look at all of the different demands on your time and see what are ways in which you can make life easier for you. Many times it's just, I think as women, we tend to take a lot on our plates, but you've got to understand there's a finite amount of energy, a finite number of hours in the day. So if you're taking on something more, then something has to make room for that, right? So it's not possible for you to be present for every single thing that your children do, for you to kind of be the most involved sort of parent out there, while at the same time being a very, very responsive sort of person at work as well. So you've got to make those trade-offs. That's my advice for anybody who feels, look, I've gotten into the wrong line. I'd say really think deeply. Is it the industry? Is it the organization? Or maybe is it even just the kind of role that you've gotten into and you don't like being an independent consultant because you find that it's actually a lot of extra work, that a lot of people expect you to be on all the time. And maybe working as a part-time employee, but in a larger organization might be a better use of your time, because not only do they have flexible hours, they kind of understand that they can't call you at all times, at all hours. So you've got to really see what aspect of it is it that you dislike, and how do you maneuver yourself out of it. But for anyone who are thinking about this, who have something in mind, just reach out to hr@nalli.com. And that probably would be a better way where offline we can sort of tackle all of the specific questions that you had about particular job opportunities in my organization. So that's hr@nalli.com.
Okay, that's great. So we come to the end of the session, and Lavanya is a mentor, a featured mentor on our portal as well. So you can follow up her on our portal, and I will share the link on the chat window. Thank you so much, Lavanya. It was a great session, and I'm sure women here would have, sorted out the issues that they have in regards to the support system. They know what exactly they need to get and from the support system, and how can they manage the support system even better. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.